Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic, the podcast that breaks down the incentive structures in our society to understand who benefits from the status quo and what's at stake for the future. I'm Matt Haller.
And I'm Chris Michaud.
Hi, Chris. Where are you right now?
Greetings from Las Vegas. I feel so lucky because I going to a Kylie Minogue concert. Camped out here for a few days, but funny story related to our first podcast. Seems so long ago now, but I went out to dinner last night and the restaurant we went to had a 20% service charge. To Shay's point around, hey, having service charge and what was the experience like? The staff there couldn't have been happier to be working there. I mean, it was like a party. I mean, now granted, literally like dancing on tables and stuff. It was interesting to see that come together. So Vegas bringing together all of our thoughts around fuzzy logic. But how about you? What's new?
I'm sitting in our house in the desert. We just replaced the roof of our casita, which leaked. And again, talking about our last episodes, speaking as a millennial homeowner, sometimes I don't want to own a home. Like going back and forth and saying, look, I get it from a financial perspective, it's great. But to Kelly's point, which she was talking about last week, that you got to get in and do renovations if you want to make a house work. It is crazy.
You get the hang of it eventually, but when it's all done, it'll be nice. So just keep focusing on that part of it. But it's giving you also an education, which is a nice segue into kind of this week's show. This week, we'll be diving into incentives around education, specifically looking at the college experience. College has been sold for us for decades as a way to get to the middle class. But now with the cost of college and the incurred debt with it rising, does college degree really pay off? And are colleges effectively preparing people for the workforce to see what actually exists in that value? We'll look for answers to those questions throughout today's episode.
Traditionally, a college degree has been hailed as the golden ticket to the middle class, promising upward mobility and financial stability. But is this narrative still holding true, or are we witnessing a shift in the ROI of higher education? On the surface, the sociological incentive to pursue higher education remains strong. Individuals are often encouraged by societal norms, familial expectations, and the allure of better job prospects to invest in a college degree. However, let's critically examine whether this investment pays off for everyone. According to the data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, individuals with a bachelor's degree earn significantly more on average than those with only a high school diploma. However, this doesn't paint the whole picture. Rising tuition costs, coupled with student loan debt reaching unprecedented levels, cast a shadow over the purported benefits of a college education, both of which can exacerbate existing inequalities and disproportionately impact marginalized communities. Moreover, the economic landscape is evolving. The emergence of alternative pathways to success, such as vocational training, coding boot camps, and entrepreneurship, challenges the traditional notion that a four-year degree is the sole gateway to a prosperous career. With the rapid advancement of technology, employers are increasingly valuing skills and competencies over formal credentials. Chris, how have we seen this play out, and where's the incentive structures today that you've seen from both the employer side, the college side, and the individual side?
Yeah, I know some larger organizations these days are really taking a hard look at this. So it used to be literally the big companies we all know of, almost at one point to sweep the floor of the place, you need to have a college degree, which I think was a bit unrealistic. However, unwinding all that, I think is going to take some time and looking at it and saying, okay, where does a college degree make sense and where it doesn't? You mentioned ROI, and I think about when I went back and got my degree. So I got undergrad in finance eons ago, but even back then, I would say the payback, figure what I spent versus what I earned, was like maybe 1.5x or something like that, maybe a little less. That was reasonable. Now, I think even if you had a high business or high paying job, the cost has gone up so much. The inflationary factor of education has outstripped healthcare. It's outstripped everything. So I think to your point, that this notion we all had to go earn money or had to go to college to earn money, I think created maybe potentially a false sense of demand in that market.
Chris, I completely agree with what you're saying, but I think it's important that we have this conversation from a perspective of multiple different majors, right? Because some majors might do better than others, where your finance degree, your computer science, engineering degrees might be fine. But then there's other degrees where we tell people, yeah, go study what you want, go be happy. And then we saddle 18-year-olds with $250,000 in debt for a degree that may or may not pay off for the job and career they want to have. And that, I think, is fundamentally what is broken in the incentive game on a college campus.
Yeah, if you think about where, again, you want to spend your scholarship dollars and where you want to allocate, I don't think either one of us would say that having an anthropology degree or a philosophy degree or an English degree is not valuable. For the record, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I think universities need to have some onus in terms of saying, okay, if that is what you're interested in and that's what you're passionate about, the realities are that the income in proportion to what you would spend to go to a top tier university, as an example, that may not set you up for success. versus saying I'm passionate about those topics, but there are alternatives. I think this kind of leads in sort of like community college slash trade schools, which have gotten the shaft for the last 30 years. I think there's an opportunity there to leverage that. And it's a better way to fund and also a better way to get students passionate about things they are without being in a lifetime of debt.
And obviously, like the colleges would tell you, the point of a degree isn't just to be a profitable career and make a lot of money, right? There's a reason why we have other programs to help pay people back for college's degrees. But I think right now it's so over leveraged. The balance is so out of whack where it's so much money that you go and I'll pick on social work as an example, but you go and get your master's in social work, you have all of this debt. The jobs do not pay. And now we have to ask the taxpayer in order to fund that kind of gap in payment. I believe that we need more social workers in this country. I believe that we should be incentivizing people to pursue that kind of work. But the amount of money that's required for us to be able to make that investment work is actually working for the country or the employee.
There's two sides to the equation. There's to your point, what we need as a society and how do we fund that from a governmental perspective, whether that's state, local, or federal. The other part of that, though, is that colleges have stripped out inflation above inflation by an order of magnitude in terms of the cost to go there. Now, I think some onus needs to go on them to say, okay, wait a minute. Just as we would say, you can't just spend an infinite amount of money as a student to borrow it to go get a degree. I think we should turn to universities as well and say, where are you spending your dollars on? And especially if you have a healthy endowment, how are you managing these types of degrees if you think they are important to society as a whole and you're a not-for-profit university? I would argue that the colleges have to pick up some of this slack as well.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, when you have a system that essentially writes a blank check to universities to say, federal government, we've got your back. If people want to go and get an education, like we will make sure that money is available. And that's a good thing. But there's also a responsibility for the schools to prepare a workforce that can support the kinds of money that they want to charge. And I think about my own experience where I was a sociology major. Shout out to all of my social people out there. But I remember learning how to do stats on a system that stopped being updated in 1989. And then go walking into the finance world and learning and figuring out how to use Excel on my own. And that's a moment where I go, why does this feel ass backwards? And is there a way that the education system can catch up to what the world is asking from it as the pace of change in our society accelerates?
Yeah, maybe just one point to wrap on that thought. You'd mentioned Excel and other things. When I went to university, which was a very novel idea then of having internships. And so I needed internships in order to graduate. So I got real world experience before I actually went out into the real world. And I think universities, you'd be surprised that people still don't do that today. So I think pushing those kind of things and probing around those is a great way to think about our first guest. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to chat with our first guest, Beth Throne, the Senior Associate Dean of Student Affairs at Franklin and Marshall College. Stay with us.
Calling all B2B sales executives. Ready to elevate your sales game? Meet Compose Comp, your partner in sales incentive excellence. Our tailored solutions blend expert design with tech innovation, ensuring your reps have the confidence to close deals. Take the first step to sales success. Visit composecomp.com and schedule your consultation now.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our first guest is Beth Throne, the Senior Associate Dean of Student Affairs at Franklin and Marshall College. Franklin and Marshall is a liberal arts college based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and has been recognized for its innovative approach to curriculum and postgraduate readiness, much of which is due to the work of Beth and her team. Welcome to the podcast, Beth.
A pleasure to be here, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
So, Beth, there's a huge conversation happening now about the value of a college degree in today's workplace environments. And while the conversation about how expensive college is isn't new, the question about whether college curriculums are keeping up with the needs of the economy at large are. What are some of the biggest pressures you've seen on universities to prepare students for the modern workforce?
Well, I think one of the greatest pressures is to design curriculum and especially experiential learning. So those outside of the classroom experiences that really translate different majors to the work that people will be doing afterward. And that's a very real pressure. Now, in the liberal arts, we know that you can contextualize information from a natural sciences, social sciences, and humanist perspective. And doing so makes you a much richer, much deeper, much more effective thinker across different business verticals and different sectors. And so being able to prove that out through the curricula and also the experiences we're giving students is exceedingly important, especially when students and their families are investing so much in their college education.
To that point, too, thinking about how some students figure out how do they stand out in terms of like supplementing their degrees?
Well, it starts with, I think, having students prepared well in that K through 12, honestly, sector. And when I mean prepared well, understanding how do you translate 4 or 5 core subjects into 30, 40 plus majors, minors, and programs. So let's start, right? You start there. And then, who someone is, the most valuable, marketable person is not just a major. It's someone who demonstrates their interest in a subject matter, even beyond their major. So whether, say, for example, someone's interested in communications, that is not a major that Franklin Marshall offers, yet we launch into that. And Chris, towards your question, it means over the summers during the academic year, pursuing those summer experiences that are in marketing or media or public relations or working for a student magazine or a student newspaper, serving as a media or communications chair for a club organization or a fraternity or sorority, right? That larger portfolio of how someone demonstrates their skill set outside of their major. So that co-curricular is, in my mind, almost as important in marketing oneself after for those well-paying selective opportunities as just a major itself.
I think that taking the approach that there's this interdisciplinary kind of multi-dimensional aspect to the educational journey is something that certainly makes for a more resilient, more adaptive employee in the future. We talk on this podcast a lot as the rapidly changing needs of the modern workforce. What's the biggest opportunity that you think colleges are facing today in that regard?
Agency, student agency. And here's what I mean. Your exceptionally resilient, competitive hire is someone who asks for more, is someone who sees the gap in opportunity and pursues it. They don't wait for the project to fall on their plate. They will see, I see a need, 2 different departments in these 2 different meetings I sat in, talked about it. I want to fill that need. And they fill that by thinking across the division, seeing that opportunity and having some agency. So for colleges, beyond the curriculum, this is what we could call a soft skill, perhaps, or perhaps it's called adulting, but it's giving students instruction and guidance of, we're going to give you these opportunities and it is up to you to step into them during college. So colleges, rather than handing students every opportunity, it is teaching them how do you take agency over your life and your actions, which will serve you exceedingly well no matter what sector you go into.
I don't want to knock the concept of traditional academics and your traditional major because I loved my major. I had a wonderful time. I learned a lot. But in reflecting on my education, the value of that major wasn't actually the focus area of what I was studying. It's the way they taught me to analyze a topic and the way to think about analyzing something from multiple different angles. That has allowed me to be more adaptive in the future. That's not really a skill. That's a training. That's a way that you can teach someone how to mature. I'm curious if you see the value of going to an institute of higher education compared to, say, like a coding boot camp, which can give you those same skills, is more that we're teaching you to be more resilient for a world that is changing. I can't tell you what the world looks like in the future, but I can give you a lot of tools to be able to adapt to it in the future.
Well, Matt, you hit it on the head where you started. A great college education doesn't teach you what to think. It teaches you how to think, because the problems that students, today's graduates, will face are ones we can only contemplate right now. One of the values of higher education is you think very, very deeply on a subject. And it's not that I'm learning, say, psychology, which was my major here at F&M actually years ago. It's not that I'm just learning about positive and negative reinforcement and certain theories or principles. What I'm doing is learning about, how do I think about human behavior? How do I incent it, right? It's appropriate for this, I suppose. How do I use what I've learned, and in my case, to conduct depositions in law or in the trajectory in staffing, to understand how to match talent with opportunities and culture and the social psychology and the organizational pieces. That is a nuance that requires deep thought in knowing how to approach something and having a toolbox of deconstructing and reconstructing information, and not here, watch this certain video or boot camp just to master this particular slice of information. It's much broader.
Just based on your interactions too, thinking about with employers, do you think the 4-year degree is going to remain the base requirement for most careers in the future? Or do you see some of that, depending on the nature of the program, changing?
It depends, right? So, for certain technical trades, knowing the technical trade is enough. However, starting the business, doing the marketing, understanding how to read a P&L, understanding how to fundraise, or to have stakeholder relationships, it requires a social and an intellectual sophistication that certain levels of schooling cannot give you.
I want to ask just one provocative question. Do you think everyone should go to college or everyone should have the opportunity to go to college? And if yes, why? And if no, what are some of the parameters you think say, yes, this is a really good jumping off point to go and get that higher education?
That's a great question. So interestingly, the school district where my kids, I've mother 4, 7 to 19. So first year in college to a first grader right now. I've had a lot of discussions when I volunteer, and I do, for the college and admission counseling folks about the preparation and the discussions with seniors. And I'll be honest, at first I was like, everyone should know about college and their rights and their paths. And then I started doing a lot of volunteering. And I took off my lens of living in the world that I do, and the world as a first-gen college student, which I was, the world that I came from, and the pressure on me in my family to earn and be more. And I think I've come to quickly realize that a 4-year college is not the path for everyone. A 2-year associate degree, maybe for some, starting in a community college and transferring, maybe for some. So it's a path for each person to customize financially and per what goals, because at the end of the day, I truly believe, and this may be heresy in the environment I'm in, that a college degree is to launch you successfully into a future. And that depends on what you define as success. So if it's a job making a certain amount, right, that provides for your family, if it's to advance to get a terminal degree and be able to do something more, then yeah, you're going to need that. So is it for everyone? No. Should it be accessible? Heck yes. And as the parent of 4, I struggle with that because it is an expensive proposition no matter what form a 4-year degree takes. So I think that's a whole other dialogue, but it is right now exceedingly costly and important that we prepare our students to choose and make great choices right there.
Thank you so much for joining us, Beth. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk to Hannah Wolf, a seasoned career expert who will be joining us. Stay with us. Our second guest today is Hannah Wolf. Hannah is the founder of Wolf Career Coaching, which aims to provide career mentoring, resume reviews, and interview prep for early career applicants. Hannah also has over a decade of experience building early career programs for companies like Spotify, Yahoo, and Bloomberg LP. Welcome to Fuzzy Logic, Hannah.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So before we talk about the trends that you're seeing in career preparedness from college students and folks who are starting their careers, I'm curious to know your story. How well did you feel prepared for that step of life after college? And in what ways did you feel unprepared?
Ooh, very good question. So yeah, in college, I relied really heavily on career services because that was really all that I knew to turn to. And they were helpful to me. Like they really got the basics down. I feel like I actually still use the same resume format actually from my college days. So there were some good building blocks there. But I think what I realized as I started to really start to look for jobs was you needed a lot of different perspectives on your applicant profile. Talking to my parents, obviously trying to network as much as I can just to get eyes on the resume, eyes on my job search process, talking to friends even and peers. And that's the advice that I give today to students is have a diverse network of people looking at your application materials to make sure it's really well-rounded and it hits on multiple different levels.
Hannah, on this show, we talk a lot about how rapidly the world is changing around us and how prepared we are for it. How have you seen colleges and universities adapt to the pace of change? And how ready are those early career applicants for their first couple of steps in the workforce?
Yeah, I think colleges do the best that they can to prepare students, but I think that there's just such a world of unknown, especially when it comes to figuring out what type of job you want to do. Obviously, some colleges are doing it better than others, and some are much bigger and have many more programs and stuff. But what I often find, and this is like part of my coaching business, is really working with students to figure out what beyond financial analyst or data scientist or like very generic, broad categories of job types, because today's day and age, those data science generic roles are getting hundreds of thousands of applicants, right? Especially at the top companies. So that's a lot of what my coaching work has morphed into, has been talking to students about, okay, there's data science is a huge umbrella category for lots of different types of roles, or that skill set can be transferred to other types of roles. And you might be able to find just, again, applications that are more untapped than some of the big companies out there, the blanket recs that you see, because you are really sending your application into the void, if you will.
Do you think that's about the fact that the pace of change, like data science wasn't a job 15 years ago? Maybe it was, but broadly, it certainly wasn't to the level that it is today. Do you see that there's almost just like a disconnect between the worlds that higher education lives in versus the world of our companies, employers?
Yeah, I definitely think the trickle down is slow to colleges and universities. For instance, when I was at Spotify, we had a huge need for hiring mobile engineers, right? Like in 2017, 2018 timeframe. And we could not find qualified students with mobile engineering backgrounds, right? And then all of a sudden, 2 or so years later, we see all of these boot camps and accelerator programs and even some computer science majors and stuff like that that were working app development and mobile engineering into their curriculum. And it was a little too late, right? Because we had already then no longer needed mobile engineers and we were really focused on data engineers. And then we were struggling to find data engineers right out of school. So yeah, I definitely think the pace of change is a little bit slower when it comes to academia. I think an interesting spot that I've really become very passionate about is the boot camp space, is the like alternative education space where these companies become like startups, if you will, and they're focused on giving rapid skills to students or continuing education or career transitioners. And we found that has been a really awesome place to hire from, especially from a diversity perspective, because they're much cheaper than a 4-year college degree.
Matt and I were talking about that too in the earlier segment of trade schools and 2-year colleges have really gotten the shaft for the last 25 years, right? We told everybody, regardless of what they were interested in or what they thought they were, you have to go get a 4-year degree. To your point, you've seen the effects of that. But in that kind of trade school or those alternative educations where you can get someone in a skill that they're passionate about, useful and up to speed quickly, what do you think either 2-year colleges should be doing to make that happen? Or are there even 4-year schools that should take a step back and say, okay, are there certain things that maybe we don't need to do as a 4-year degree anymore? Maybe it can be done into, or maybe it should be done somewhere else.
That's a really interesting idea for 4-year colleges maybe to adopt the model or shorten certain majors. Again, I'm really a huge fan of these accelerated programs. The one thing that I will say that's missing is, and I do think that you more or less pay for this with college, is the immersion and living on your own and being on a campus, and that sort of going away, trying to figure it out is definitely really important. And with these shorter term programs, you're not getting as much of that. At 2-year schools, you might, but definitely at the boot camps and stuff like that, you're not getting as much of that. So I do find that might be what's missing.
To the boot camp point you mentioned earlier, do you see boot camps potentially and the organizations that represent them being able to do that as a recruitment tool or a tool to train people?
Yeah, so there's lots of employers out there who are essentially housing a boot camp internally. They're bigger organizations. At Spotify, our solve to the problem was we would partner and recruit from local boot camps, but we had an elongated development program that was supposed to give graduates from those types of programs more applied engineering experience and real world project work within Spotify. It was an 18-week program as opposed to like our internship, which was 10 to 12 weeks long. And the hope was at the end, once you complete the boot camp and then you complete the program, you should be at the level of an associate engineer, if you will. And yeah, to your point, there are some employers out there that actually take people in and have them go through an 8-month boot camp while they're working on project work internally at the company as well.
If you could look into a crystal ball, see the future of the relationship between higher education and employers, what do you think that relationship looks like?
Great question. Something's got to give in higher education. I was just talking to a financial analyst friend. Projected cost for sending your kid, like our kids, to college is around $600,000. And that is quite a staggering price. So something has to give with the way that the price is inflating for higher education. I really believe strongly that employers, especially like the Googles, the Facebooks, it would be amazing if we could move away from requiring a bachelor's degree for certain roles. And a lot of companies have already waived that, but there needs to be a lot more. And so I would love it if large employers, right? And some of these companies are doing things in a small way, but like the Googles, the Facebooks, large companies with a lot of resources could partner with higher education institutions on like curriculum, having employees become professors and help to essentially lower the cost of education. That would be something that I hope to see in the future.
Thank you so much for stopping by, Hannah. We're going to take a quick break, then come back and talk about our predictions for the future.
Hey B2B sales pros, want to maximize your team's performance? Discover Compose Comp, your key to optimize sales incentives. We blend expertise and technology to give your reps the edge they need to close deals. Don't settle for ordinary. Visit composecomp.com and unlock your team's full potential today.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. It's time for some predictions. Chris, what do you think about the future of education?
Wow, feel like I need a giant crystal ball for that. But I think given the two guests we had today, I think there's one big theme that I got out of both of them, which is the idea of education, whether that's a 2-year or a 4-year degree or a boot camp. It isn't really about here is the degree or here is the piece of paper. It's really about how to prepare for ambiguity. So teaching how to think, I think, was something that came out of each one of those conversations and is still a question that many of them are still trying to solve.
Yeah, I love the fact that Beth was talking about how the goal of your college education isn't just the degree. It's that I need to prepare you to be able to think about a world that's going to change. What I think is interesting is it still feels like there's a gap today. Listening to Hannah say that school is trying to create this kind of immersive environment to help you mature and be able to respond to issues on your own, have that agency that Beth was talking about. But there's still a big gap to fill. Some of that's definitely from COVID, where just the world was turned upside down for a few years of college grads. But there's still more work to do to make sure that young people between the ages of 18 and 22 or 24, however long it takes for you to finish college, have the opportunity to go and get those skills, because that's what makes you a better modern worker.
You know, one would question, okay, is the incentive of spending $60,000 a year to go to school to learn soft skills, is that a good ROI? It's sort of TBD, but I do think there's an opportunity to say, okay, whether I'm invested in a 2 or 4 year program, how can I collaborate with employers? Because they want the same soft skills. So everyone wants these soft skills. No one's just 100% sure how to make that happen. And it feels like there's not a good transition into that, into the workforce, or even teaching at university. So trying to find that right balance and say, okay, how do we partner together to do that? I think might accelerate employers and getting more productivity out of people quickly. Again, there's an incentive there, but also universities to say, look, we partner with these organizations, not just on that we placed you there, like job placement was one metric, but the ability to actually place someone and feel confident about them as a cultural fit and as a soft skill fit, I think has profound impacts on productivity, turnover, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges of the ivory tower is that it is removed in many regards from the workforces where they send their graduates. And I think you heard Beth say, like, we don't have communication majors at her institution, right? They're like, we have an anthropology major who also went and did a bunch of work on communications. I think that taking that approach, again, it's less about the actual skill that you're building. We can get those skills from boot camps, from 2-year institutions, but it's being able to apply those in the right way, work with different personalities, and be able to respond to ambiguous, difficult situations that potentially maybe that is the $250,000 skill.
I think Beth actually even took a step outside of her own comfort zone. She admitted it and said, maybe that isn't necessarily the case, but at least she's thinking about it. And I think even Hannah, to some extent, the same way, how she thinks about the coaching and the boot camps. Everyone's starting to try to think about this a little bit differently, because they all agree the skills we needed 10 years ago or 20 years ago are not the same skills we need now, much less 10 years from now. I know last week I was more pessimistic on the housing market, but I would say in this case, I think higher education is starting to think about this differently and trying to adapt to the market while maintaining true to their roots and why you should go get an education.
So wrapping up then, where do you see higher education going for the next 15, 20 years?
I think it's adapt or become irrelevant, right? The value of an education is proportion to the output that you can get out of it, not only from an individual level, but from a society level. And so if society is starting to ask for more softer skills, how do we amp up our EQ while maintaining a degree of intelligence? Universities are going to need to adapt around that.
I think that it's a tough moment right now because we're in a world where it's very expensive, but the message is still you need to go to college. But we're starting to see different paths available and starting to see a little bit more clearly what skills really drive success. And ultimately, I think that the future is going to be brighter because people will actually have more opportunities than they otherwise were given in the past.
To quote the great Tim Book 3, the future's so bright, I got to wear shades.
And with that, Chris, I think it's a good place for us to wrap up and have you read us out.
Great, thanks. And thanks so much for tuning in for this episode of Fuzzy Logic. Fuzzy Logic is produced by our illustrious producer, Mitch Rissmiller. New episodes drop on Wednesdays wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.